Hi there everybody, and welcome to D&D Horror Stories with D&D Doge. In today's video, we have yet another story about a player bringing an illicit substance to a Dungeons & Dragons game, but this time, some of the players partake, leading to insanity. A story about why it is important to separate a character from a player, and much more. So, without further ado, let's get right into some D&D horror stories. New player has a bad case of character bleed and nearly ends a friendship out of the game. Submitted to the D&D Doge subreddit by Reddit user Funky Yeen. This happened around 4 years ago. I was part of a D&D group and we were all very close friends. We've been playing together for quite some time when a friend, who was very curious about D&D, asked if she could join. I will call her Jane. Jane was very excited to join our new campaign, and we all agreed to run a simple story so she could get used to the game. She was already part of our D&D Discord server and was not a complete stranger to the whole concept of D&D. But we spent quite some time teaching her the basics before we started playing. Jane was going to play a ranger. Since our other friend, Mark, couldn't show up to the first session because of work, he would join us later. My character and Jane's character met each other, and we were offered a lot of chances to roleplay. But because of my rogue's personality, Jane's ranger did not like her one bit. Her character was really rude towards mine, which is fine. Bad first impressions can develop into interesting relationships anyway, so I was just rolling with it. After the session was over though, Jane sent me a long message explaining why her character didn't trust mine and why my rogue's personality annoyed her character. She ended the text by apologizing, and I replied, letting her know that I didn't mind and how they could probably become friends later on. It was roleplay after all. Jane seemed to understand, and we didn't talk about it anymore. But then, session 2 came, and Mark's character was introduced. A big fighter man who was very talkative, but cared about roles a lot. He made that very clear when my rogue made a joke about pickpocketing, and his character straight up scolded mine. We all had a good laugh out of character. Session 3 comes up, and our dungeon master describes how we needed to get information from an NPC who was inside of a big house, which we weren't allowed in, of course. So, my rogue starts to think of a clever way to sneak in, but Mark's fighter says that he doesn't agree with trespassing. Mark and I had a good roleplay moment, having both trying to get into an agreement, while Jane's ranger straight up jumped through a window when none of us were looking. Her rolls were good, and not even the guards noticed her. Out of character, Mark and I were cheering her on and making comments on how lucky she was. She found the NPC and was able to get the information we needed by overhearing his conversation with other people. Jane's character comes back, only to get big time scolded in character by Mark. Then, Jane goes quiet in the voice chat and disconnects. We thought she was having some connection issues, but she never came back or wrote anything in the chat using data, which we normally do in those situations. The next day comes, and Jane sends me a long message telling me how upset she was with Mark, how his character was an a-hole to hers, even though she helped, and how she didn't want to play with him anymore. I was very confused, because I couldn't tell if she was angry at Mark's character, or at him. In some parts of the text, she would say things like, "He always does things like this, like that time when," and bring up past real-life events. I replied by saying that she shouldn't be mixing in-character feelings with real-life ones, and that if she had something against Mark, she needed to talk to him out of game and figure it all out by themselves. She insisted that she had nothing against him out of game, but his fighter was a jerk. I reminded her that if that was the case, she should remember how our characters didn't click at first, and how that sometimes happens in role-playing games. And that's okay. How interesting things can come out of a bad first impression. I'm not sure Jane understood any of this. She played another couple of sessions after, but left the campaign saying that she wasn't feeling her character anymore and would like to make a new one. We paused the campaign and told her that we would wait until she was ready to come back, though she never came back. And for a couple of years, she wasn't really interacting with Mark at all and avoided him at all costs, barely staying in the voice chat when he would join. She scrapped all the files regarding her character from the server, like deleting the mood boards we created together, character sheets, and even a doodle one of our artist friends made of her character, like it never existed. So yeah, that was weird. Earlier this year, Jane reached out by saying that she wanted to play a new campaign with us, but without Mark. She even said she wanted to make a new character, but I don't know. I feel like if we bring her back to the table, something similar might happen again. Well, it certainly does sound like there was some character bleed going on there. I think some people just have trouble disassociating with their characters in tabletop RPGs sometimes. And as it sounded, this was her first game, and I think that type of thing can easily happen to new players. OP even tried explaining that it was all just roleplay, and even made sure that Jane didn't have any issue with Mark outside of the table. But why then was she so adamant on Mark not being in the game if she were to join a new campaign then? Did she really hold that much of a grudge for the way Mark acted in character? If that is the case, then I think there is something else going on there mentally that needs to be addressed. Perhaps Jane is on the spectrum and might have trouble separating fantasy from reality. As far as OP running a game with her in it, that is totally up to OP. But perhaps, if given another chance, Jane will learn how to separate the player from the character. But those are just my thoughts. What do you guys think? On to the next post. D&D player brings crystal meth to the table. By Reddit user KindPeace339. This was a campaign between me and some friends, and this incident happened about a month ago. We were in school and would often meet up at DM's dorm to play D&D. The ironic thing about this campaign was just how normal it was until the incident. We were playing a campaign about pirates raiding the Sword Coast. It was heavily implied that the pirate leader had other ambitions besides mere raiding. I was playing as a human monk, and my other friends played as a tabaxi warlock, a half-elf rogue, and a hobgoblin cleric. By around 3 months in, we had successfully defended Waterdeep from the pirates, and so we decided to stealthily sail across the sea on board a merchant ship into uncharted waters to find the pirate horde's secret island. On board this merchant ship, we got to know the crew, the servants, transient merchants, and nobles, etc. But then, one day, out of seemingly nowhere, Tabaxi Warlock asked if we wanted to get high this session and spice it up. Now, we sometimes would have some beer during sessions, sometimes a little too much. And I know Tabaxi Warlock has experimented with cocaine before, but I was not prepared for him to pull out a bag of crystal meth. Well, that escalated from a few beers a session, huh? The whole table was shocked, except the DM, who he had already apparently talked to about doing this. Me and Hobgoblin Cleric outright refused, but Half-Elf Rogue was curious, and after a few minutes of prodding and going back and forth with me and Hobgoblin as well, Half-Elf decided to try the meth too. We really did try to tell them how dangerous this was, but they just brushed it off and said that it was just one time, and that we were just being hysterical like people used to be about weed and even alcohol. We probably should have left after that, because what followed next was an absolute shit show. During the course of the session, as Half-Elf Rogue, Tabaxi Warlock, and the effing DM started getting high and acting more and more insane, Half-Elf Rogue and Tabaxi Warlock quickly went from rational team players into insane murder hobos, who out of nowhere would out of game jump up and yell things like, "I stab him," to random crewmates, as the Dungeon Master just went along with it. By the time combat came around, Dungeon Master sent impossibly overpowered enemies to attack us from random realms. Luckily, we made it out of this, because the Dungeon Master seemed to forget how to actually run these monsters, and basically just let us kill them. So our level 5 party was slaying challenge rating 20+ monsters, such as liches or gold dragons, and eating up XP to the point of breaking the game. By the time the session ended, literally nothing made sense, and a random spelljammer run by Strahd had captured us and whisked us away to the Nine Hells, which was also somehow the Feywild at the same time. Yes, it really was that erratic. By this point, me and Hobgoblin's player had basically checked out and were just staying out of concern for our friends. Thankfully, that one bag was all Tabaxi's player had, so we didn't have to worry about them perpetually chasing the high. But getting them to sleep was hell. We ended up staying the night to keep an eye on them, as they woke up throughout the night, paranoid as all get out. DM even thought that various D&D enemies, like the aforementioned dragons for example, were coming to kill him. It was a long night, and afterwards, we really did lay into them about how stupid that was. They agreed, and promised never to pull anything like that again. I am worried about the chance of them developing an addiction though, because it is hard to quit meth, even after one time. We haven't played again yet, as this incident kinda traumatized them towards D&D, and I'm pretty sure that campaign is over. Not that it really matters at this point, given our greater concern. TLDR, player brings meth to D&D session, and half the table gets high, including the DM. We have to stay there to keep an eye on them till they sobered up. Wow, this is like the second story in 2 weeks, where someone brings hard drugs to a game of Dungeons and Dragons. Except this time, some of the players, including the DM, all did them instead of turning them down. I can understand OP saying that they should have left when Tabaxi Warlock pulled out the bag, but I think in the end, it was a good thing that OP and Hobgoblin stayed, just to make sure that the other players didn't do anything stupid during their experience. Hopefully, the other players learn from this experience and never touch that crap again. That is like one of the worst things to do. Personally, my advice would be to just stick with the beer. At least that way, you don't think actual dragons are after you. But speaking of dragons being after you, if you are enjoying the video so far, liking and subscribing really helps out the channel by feeding the algorithm dragon. Plus it makes Nipsey really happy.
Yes, I do like it when you like the video.
But with that said, let's move on to the next post. Dungeon Master wants to fire me for having a baby, by Reddit user GhostFence11. So I've been playing with a group for almost 2 years, I think, not quite sure. It's been a while. It was the DM, 3 other players, my husband, and myself. Everyone was enjoying the game, as far as I knew, and no one had any over-the-table issues that I knew of. But then I got pregnant. Immediately, it seemed that the DM started bullying me. Even outside observers noticed. Admittedly, my attention span and energy levels were shot, but I tried as hard as I could, and it didn't seem to disrupt things too much. Once I had the baby though, we took a break from the campaign, and I got to talking with my best friend, not a player, who told me that the DM not only didn't want me to keep playing, but that he had told her that my husband and I play D&D wrong. Again, no issues were ever brought up in person. So I'm not sure what to do. We haven't played since the birth, using the baby as an excuse. We've barely spoken to the DM, and he doesn't really initiate. The other players have said that they want us back, but I don't know what to tell them since I don't want to ruin their side campaign with the DM. Any advice? Edit. Because I can't respond to everyone. These are the main points. 1. You're relying on rumors. It's going to sound naive, but my best friend and I don't lie to each other. Our friendship has almost ended multiple times because of hard truths. I trust her second most in the world. 2. Talk to the DM. He is a manipulator and will 100% mess up your brain. Hindsight is 20/20. Also, he's twice my size, and I'm moderately scared of him. In addition, I don't want to keep playing this game anymore after how he acted when I was pregnant. 3. Just leave. I still have 2 good friends playing a different campaign with him. They want us back, though if I tell them the real reason, it'll break up their friendship, which may be a good thing. 4. DM yourself. That is the plan. 5. It's not about the baby. It is. He doesn't want us because the baby is our priority over the game. This part I kind of understand, but he had to know that it was coming eventually, as we were always open that we'd be having kids. 6. Your title is stupid. Probably. I thought it was funny, but I have a weird sense of humor sometimes. 7. What does being a bad player mean? As far as I could gather, role-playing a character he didn't like. No, I was not disruptive. And yes, I still paid attention almost as well as everyone else. 8. He has a crush on you. Ick, I hope not. He's 20 years older than me and has been a bit of a creep to my best friend. 9. What's the problem? Leaving gracefully without blowing up my other friend's happy game. I think I covered everything. Thanks for the congrats on the baby. It is the best baby. Well, that certainly sounds like a bit of a conundrum that OP is in. Honestly, the DM sounds like an a-hole and a bit of a creep if OP's description is to be believed. But honestly, OP has the perfect excuse to not go back to playing in his game, the baby. And by the sounds of it, OP and her husband have already been using the baby as the reason why they haven't gone back yet. Just tell the DM that you don't think you have the time anymore, and that it's taking more of your time than you originally thought it would. That way, you don't risk blowing up any friendships, and you don't have to play with this DM anymore. Now, is it the most truthful? Not really. But hey, you aren't necessarily lying, as I'm sure having a baby is very time-consuming. Though, those are just my thoughts on the matter. What do you guys think? Let's move on. Player drags down the game with his mood. By Reddit user KRokon. A dungeon master I knew wanted to do a 3-session Ravenloft setting one-shot, which I agreed to. The game took place on Roll20, and besides the incidents that happened, we all, except for Rich and Josh, had a good time in the end. The important cast: Rich, the problem player, and Josh, Rich's friend. The first session starts, and we're in a domain where a rebellion is going on. We learn about a bunch of mutilated animals that came from a lab in the middle of the island that have been making frequent raids to the crops, and sometimes the human population that live in this coastal town. We decide to investigate the lab, and that is where the story started. To be fair, Rich seemed like a good person when we first met him. He was passionate about the lore of the Forgotten Realms, and talked to us about the Salvatore Dritz books. However, whenever he rolled poorly, he would complain about it. For example, he was trying to investigate a boat and rolled poorly on it. We could tell that he was upset. He said, Of course I can't roll for crap. I rolled someone with good investigation, and of course someone else beats me to it. Why do I even effing try? We try to assure Rich that sometimes bad rolls happen, and remind him of the good rolls he made. But he ends up sulking for the first time, and this is when we all experienced Rich's first meltdown. After we take a couple-minute break, we continue, but Rich makes a bad attack roll against a dragonfly horse that we're fighting, and he decides to complain once more. Well, this is fun. Now I have to wait another hour before I can make another attack attempt, but they'll all probably be dead before I get a chance. We tried to calm him once again and said that we weren't taking that long on our turns, but he rage quit the game for that evening. We were all feeling a little down when the DM called the session there. I remember we discussed this incident with the Dungeon Master and Josh, Rich's friend, and he explained how Rich would once in a while get into meltdowns like this, but he would feel better by the next session. Dungeon Master decided to have a talk with Rich about his behavior, and Rich eventually calmed down. Considering how this happened only once, we decided to give Rich a second chance, as we can understand depression and how hard it is to deal with. I don't think that depression caused him to have a meltdown like that and rage quit. Plenty of people have depression and don't take it out on other people, or have hissy fits when something doesn't go their way. I think Rich was just straight up being childish. But let's move on. In the second session, things start off fine. But when we reach the lab itself and are trying to solve a puzzle 2 hours into the session at that point that requires us to try to put together a series of pictures, Rich and another player get into a disagreement. At first, they talk things out, but Rich soon snaps once more. You know what? Fine. Do what you want. What do I know about teamwork? The player Rich argued with left the session, and Rich also leaves. This player felt bad and acted like they were in the wrong, and we had to assure him that everything was fine. However, the Dungeon Master didn't want to risk having his one-shot being ruined by Rich's behavior, so he messaged him and wished him the best of luck, but said that they didn't want him to come back. Rich relays this to Josh, and Josh argues with the party about the DM's decision. We explain how he had a second chance, and how his behavior was not acceptable, as it came off like he was guilt-tripping. Josh demanded that we try to talk to Rich and get him to come back, but we don't really know Rich, so we refuse. When Josh refuses to back down, he is also kicked from the one-shot. The third session was smooth sailing from there. We killed a scientist, who was a low-level Dark Lord, who was responsible for the mutant animal raids. Afterwards, we part ways with each other and leave the domain to return to our homes. Besides Rich and his friend, we had a really good time, but I'm also hoping that Rich eventually gets the help that he needs. TLDR. We play a long shot in a Ravenloft campaign. Things go well until the dice aren't in Rich's favor, which ends in him complaining and dragging things down with his mood. He rage quits in the first session, and then scares a player off, which ends in him being kicked from the one-shot. I don't know. I think the help that Rich needs is someone telling him that the world doesn't revolve around him. I can understand not being happy when a roll doesn't go your way, but it is a game, and you can't expect to roll good for everything. But instead of taking the bad rolls with grace, he decided to act like a child and rage quit like he was playing a Call of Duty match or something. Though some people do have their off days, and the group was willing to give him another chance. But he still had his rage, but this time aimed it towards another player, to the point that that player left, thinking that they did something wrong. In the end, I think it was the right decision to kick Rich from the game, as it just seemed like the only thing he was doing was bringing everyone else down with his tantrums. And by the sounds of it, it did make the game more enjoyable afterwards. But that is all I have for you today. As always, I appreciate all of you. especially if you like and subscribe. And may your games remain horror story free. Until next time.